Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Lion's Den. This is the Weekly Roar. Welcome back, you guys. It's great to have you here today for the next lesson learned in leadership, another mentoring moment. Today's lesson is about the importance of keeping things real, which can be a challenge for those of us who foster an optimistic attitude. I'm going to talk all about that in just a second. But first, I'm Greg Storch. I'm the owner of Lion Enterprise, host of the Weekly Roar, and the founder of a worldwide bartered coaching program called The Helping Hand. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. Now, last week, we continued with my newest leadership series, Mentoring Moments in Leadership, with a lesson about the importance of finding your strengths and then working in your strength zone in order to reach your potential. While it's good to know your areas of weakness, it's even more important that we spend time identifying and focusing on our strengths. As leaders, that's where we want to be spending all of our time. Now, if you weren't able to join us last Wednesday for the Weekly Roar, or if you need to catch up, or you just want to watch that session over again, you can access all of my free video resources on my website at lion-enterprise.com. Click on the Lion's Pride Library menu to find video number 131 for last week. And while you're in the Lion's Pride Library, make sure you look around and stay a while. It is a free resource, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. Okay, let's jump right into today's topic that I'm calling Time for a Reality Check. You probably heard this quote from William Arthur Warren before, but it bears repeating today as we kick things off. And he said, "The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The realist adjusts the sails." The balance of optimism with realism during challenging times is how leaders win. And I think that you'd all agree that we're in some pretty challenging times right now. So today, I wanted to talk to you about the importance of facing reality, even as an optimist. It's not to say that you can't be hopeful for an optimal outcome. I think all of us here in the Lion's Den today are wired to be optimistic. The challenge, though, is that when I mention the word reality, it tends to be associated more with pessimism than optimism. But optimism and pessimism lies in the way we explain things that happen to us. These are automatic thoughts, and they can make us inaccurately assess things and then jump to the wrong conclusions. And for leaders, that can be a real problem. Heck, it can be a problem for anyone, but especially for leaders. Optimism and pessimism, they sit on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and in the middle lies realism. Let me share this story with you. And you may have already heard about this from history lessons, but I want to share a quick story about Navy Admiral James Stockdale, who was an aviator during the Vietnam War. Now, in 1965, his plane was shot down over a small village where he ejected and landed. He suffered several broken bones when he hit the ground. He was, of course, captured and taken as a prisoner of war to a camp in Hanoi, which was called the Hanoi Hilton. I'm sure you've heard of it before. Now, the Hanoi Hilton was known for its brutality of its prisoners, and he was held there for almost 8 years. But from the very beginning of his capture, Stockdale refused to cooperate with his captors, and after he was caught urging the other POWs to resist, he was taken to another jail block where he was frequently tortured. He spent 2 years in heavy leg irons and another 4 years in isolation. Can you imagine? Stockdale survived what many others didn't, and he was eventually awarded the Medal of Honor in 1976. I love what he said, though, when asked how he survived something that many others had not. His response really captures the essence of the importance of facing reality. Admiral Stockdale said, "You must never confuse faith that you'll prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." Although we're not prisoners of war, a lot of us can probably relate to Admiral Stockdale right now in the sense that we have absolutely no idea how long we'll be wrestling with the challenges brought on by our current pandemic. So I think it would be safe for me to say that you all would agree that good leaders must be able to think forward and form a vision. They have to be able to identify a destination or a target that they're reaching to achieve with the help of others. Casting a vision as a leader requires us to think in a positive and optimistic way. It requires that we even consider things that may not be commonplace or reality at the moment. And while following a vision is critical, every leader must also be a realist, be able to deliver reality checks when the situation demands. One of our primary responsibilities as leaders is to define reality. Our desire to focus on vision can actually be negatively impacted when we fail to face reality. Now, admittedly, this can be a hard lesson to learn, especially when you're someone who naturally thinks positive, like me. Many of us are just wired to provide hope and encourage others, but sometimes you just have to look reality in the eye and accept it. If you have an aversion to being realistic, which many people do, or if you're just reluctant to acknowledge the fact that it's a leader's responsibility to define it, then it's going to cost you big time. I can tell you that this was hard for me to grasp as a young leader, and I'm going to share a story in a minute about the company I used to work for and how their refusal to define reality ended up costing them not only a lot of money, but their reputation as well. Now, if you tend to be optimistic and generally encourage others, then you might want to pay attention here and consider that it might take a little extra effort to look reality in the eye and stay grounded. If we lack realism today, then we just might lack credibility with others tomorrow. So if you want to expend more effort towards facing reality and staying grounded in it, then consider these three basic things that are going to help you do just that. First of all, leaders should continually cast a realistic eye on their situation because more times than not, it's worse than they think. Same with the process, because it usually takes longer than you expected it to. And then another thing to keep an eye on is, of course, costs. And that's because the reality is that whatever it is you're trying to do, it's going to have a higher price than you expected. The reason why I'm encouraging you to consider a more realistic view of things and why it's one of the most critical things a leader must do is because at the end of the day, we're responsible for others and they depend on us. We have to be able to define reality, and that means embracing realistic thinking. Realistic thinking helps us see the consequences of our actions clearer than those around us. What we do or what we don't do as leaders always has consequences. We all know that. But if we continue to attempt to maintain this unrealistic outlook, we're going to ultimately pay a price for it. Peter Drucker once said that a time of turbulence is a dangerous time, but its greatest danger is a temptation to deny reality. And that brings me to the story I wanted to share with you today. This is an example of how when leadership failed to correctly define reality, they not only hurt themselves, but others as well. Ultimately, people lost their jobs, teams were broken up, and friendships were damaged. Now, I've told you all before about the company I worked for in DC and how they won a 10-year contract to provide IT service and infrastructure support at one of the federal agencies. At the time, it was the largest contract for the company, and it was instrumental in their exponential growth. Well, the contract was awarded because the previous service provider failed to deliver. So our company was facing challenges from the very beginning. I joined the contract about a year and a half after it was awarded, and I came on board as the operations manager. Now, before I arrived, the transition of that contract didn't go very well. The company was struggling to meet the requirements of the contract, even from an administrative perspective. They were behind in invoicing, and the invoices they did submit, they weren't right. In addition, we really struggled with staffing, and some of the critical vacancies were far exceeding the expected fill times. Well, about 8 months later, I eventually promoted to the program manager position over the entire contract, and I was the management representative that worked on site with the customer. Now, I was the guy dealing with the reality of what was actually happening between service provision and the customer who needed the services. The customer started to implement these reoccurring monthly briefings that we called program management reviews, or PMRs for short. Now, the PMR meetings were held between the federal customers and company leadership. There, we would review compliance metrics and the status of funding and invoices. The meetings, they became tumultuous, to say the least, as the customer became more and more frustrated with the poor service delivery. Now, as a program manager, I was constantly in meetings on site with the contracting officer's representative. Now, that's the Fed who was responsible for ensuring that the company met all the requirements of the contract. And I was also meeting with the Fed in charge of providing IT service and support throughout that agency. He depended on us to provide those services. He wasn't happy either. Then, once a quarter, I would travel back to the home office in Northern Virginia, and I would have to brief the company leadership on the status of my program. I tracked everything to a T, from personnel to finances. I presented them with the financial issues, the staffing struggles, you name it, quality assurance problems. I recommended approaches to help resolve those issues as well. And at those meetings, I was told that I had the full attention of the company and full reign to do what I needed to do, really, to get things back on the right track. Then, of course, I would go back to work at the customer side and nothing would change. I'd try and get things done, but wasn't happening. The customer, expectedly, grew more and more frustrated, which led to the company president having to come into DC and meet with the federal customers. And she had to do that on several occasions. Whew. Man, some of those meetings were super uncomfortable. Over the years that I led that contract, many of the vice presidents and the CEO herself were on site meeting with the federal customer to hear their concerns. Unfortunately, they were the same concerns over and over again. But here's the thing. Here's the thing I wanted to highlight about this story. And it's that the owner, she was a super optimistic person. She was so high energy and almost seemed to view the world through rose-colored glasses. And personally, I think that really got in her way for seeing the reality of the situation. She would meet with the customer, make promises to address the problems, and then she would leave again and nothing really changed. It began to be viewed as just lip service. If it hadn't been for me and the team that was on site making needed changes and adjustments, it's hard to tell what would have happened. It was pretty ugly and, of course, very frustrating for me as the leader because I felt my hands were tied a little bit. In the end, the CEO's inability to face the reality of the situation ended up costing her the entire contract. That contract employed a lot of the people at the company, and the loss of revenue from that contract resulted in having to let go of many employees. The service reputation of the company was tarnished, despite my efforts with the customer. The continual empty promises made by the CEO and her C-suite executives to the customer ultimately resulted in the customer actively avoiding any future work with that company. Any contractors that were thinking about partnering with our company on the new contract, they weren't even considered for the new award. It was that bad. I mean, the customer, if they saw the name of the company, they automatically disqualified the other company that was partnering with them. So you can plainly see in this real life example how when a leader avoids being realistic and fails to understand their responsibility to define what reality truly is, it can cost them a great deal. Now, as I said before, I know most of you have a natural bend to think the best of every situation and overlook the negative. We don't tend to waste our energy in the negative space. So if you tend to be very optimistic to the point that you don't consider the reality of the situation, then here are 4 quick things that you can do to help you defend against thinking unrealistically. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is you have to get a reality check by admitting your weakness. It's like those who struggle with an addiction. The first step they have to take is admitting that they have a problem, right? The same goes for us. We have to admit to others that we can be unrealistic. But once we do that, then we can actually start to get better with it. We can't define reality if we aren't willing to face it first. Now, the second thing comes from something I've spoken about many times before, and it's the importance of who we choose to surround ourselves with. So the second practice is to surround yourself with people who are realistic. Birds of a feather flock together, right? While it's comforting to hang around people who are just like us, we need people who fill our gaps and provide strength where we're weak. Okay, and this third practice is going to require that you check your ego, leave it behind, and You got to get comfortable with who you are as a leader because it's going to require that you ask others to be honest with you. You probably heard me say this before, that you don't need to surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear. You need people around you who are going to tell you what you need to hear. The last thing you need as a leader is a bunch of yes men around you. We have to swallow our pride, and if we want honest feedback, we're going to have to ask for it. We have to be careful not to respond defensively to that feedback either, or they'll stop providing it. Leaders, they have to build trust, and they have to have an environment where others feel safe speaking truth to us. At the end of the day, people tend to shy away from facing reality, so we need others to help us do just that. And then the last thing you might want to consider is get an outside opinion. Yeah, ask somebody who's not in your organization to take a look at what you're doing. It's amazing how much we don't see when we're comfortable and familiar. Having someone outside your organization come in and observe and provide feedback can be a really helpful tool, and it's actually one I've used in the past. The feedback I got was invaluable, and it actually helped me make needed adjustments in an area where I couldn't really see reality because I was just too close to it. So again, if you struggle a little bit with your optimism getting in the way of looking at and defining reality, then you can try those 4 things to help you guard against that. So again, if you struggle a little bit with your optimism getting in the way of looking at and defining reality, then you can try these 4 things to help you guard against that. First, identify and acknowledge your weaknesses of being unrealistic. Second, surround yourself with people who are realistic. Third, ask for others to be honest with you. And then the last thing was to get an outsider's perspective. So, how do you practice realistic optimism in real life? Well, as with everything, it starts with intentionality. We have to become intentional about mixing our optimistic and realistic perspectives. In other words, combine our positive attitude with an honest evaluation of the challenges we might face along the way. And here's how you can do that. First of all, identify what it is you're trying to accomplish. For leaders, that's establishing their vision, right? Identify what success looks like and envision yourself achieving it. But then, as Eminem would say, snap back to reality. Okay, never mind. You have to also think through what challenges you might face on the way to that finish line. If you're a worrier like me, this is probably an easy part for you, but just be sure whatever you identify as potential challenges, they're realistic too. Once you've pinpointed a few obstacles, you might feel a little nervous, but that's when you bring back your optimism. Instead of shooing the challenges away, think about the steps you take to overcome them. See yourself taking those steps. See yourself trusting your power to get through. Then start making moves. At its core, what realistic optimism does is it helps you accept what you can and can't control. You can't control the bus running on time or the weather going your way on the day you plan a picnic. But you can control your plan B when the bus doesn't show up. And you can control your mindset and attitude as you weather the unexpected storm on your picnic day. And you can be optimistic about your ability to handle things, come what may. While positive thinking comes with a pressure to think happy thoughts, I like to think realistic optimism is more think powerful thoughts. And to me, that's much more meaningful and motivating. Defining reality is a critical place for leaders to begin. It creates your starting point for the journey ahead. It's the I am here pin on the map. Good leaders face reality and make changes accordingly. They don't dwell solely in optimism or pessimism, but they have a healthy balance between realism and optimism. And facing reality is not synonymous with pessimism either. A lot of times when people say, hey, face reality, they tend to relate that to being pessimistic. See, pessimists tend to believe that bad situations are their fault, that the bad situations are always going to happen to them and affect everything in their life. They also view good things that happen as flukes and that they aren't caused by anything they've directly done. I encourage you today to just never forget that the way you define reality determines where and how you lead, and where and how you lead determines where your followers end up. There's a lot depending on it. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for today. But before I wrap up, don't forget, please go back into the Lion's Den group page and participate in today's Conversation Corner. Let's talk about where you think you are on the scale between pessimism and optimism. Just how optimistic are you? If you want to keep running to the roar, then join me next week as I share another lesson learned in leadership. Now, this next lesson is a secret on how you can tell whether your leadership is effective or not. If you want to know how to do that, all you have to do is come on back to the Lion's Den next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me again today. And I just want to take a second to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating the holiday in America. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. And until we meet again next Wednesday, remember, be powerful, but stay poised, just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.